our human bodies, we have many different ways to communicate. You would be very familiar with your nervous system. For example, if you touch something hot, the information in your fingertips is relayed back to our brains and then back to our fingers so that we pull our hand away so that we don't badly burn our hand. Another method of communication in our bodies that you may be familiar with is your hormones. For example, insulin is released out after we eat, and that controls the amount of sugar in our blood. Adrenaline is released when we're under stress, or if we're in a dangerous situation and we need to get away from somewhere pretty fast. Now, scientists have discovered a new method of communication. And this is so new that it hasn't yet reached biological textbooks. And this new method of communication are these tiny bubbles. These carry information, billions of these, round in our bodies. These tiny bubbles are more correctly known as extracellular vesicles, or for the rest of this talk, EVs. Now, it's not really true to say these are actually new, because scientists did find them back in the 1980s, but they ignored them. And they dismissed these as a way of every cell in our body releasing out information, but basically as a biological rubbish bin. What we now realize is that every cell in our body releases out these EVs, but contains important and powerful information. For example, these EVs contain genetic material. So this genetic material is sent to another cell and can actually change the behavior of that cell. These EVs are found in every one of our biological fluids, in our blood, in our tears, in our sweat, in our urine, and even in our saliva. Now, you may have already inadvertently, sometime in your life, used the power of the EVs in your saliva. Before I explain, let me first ask you a question. When you get a paper cut on your finger, in general, what's the first thing you might do? Put it in your mouth. I didn't know if you're going to say ouch or put it in your mouth. Yes, you put it in your mouth. Well done. In 2011, scientists discovered that in our saliva we have specialized EVs that have a protein known as tissue factor on them. Now, this tissue factor, when it's around, can kick-start the healing process. So by putting your finger in your mouth, your EVs in your saliva are communicating with your wound, telling the cells of that wound to heal faster and protecting it from infection. And this innate instinctive response is found throughout the animal system. Now we know about the importance of these EVs, we now have to look at their world and how small they actually are. And to do this, we're going to examine some blood. If we zoom in on a single drop of blood, what we might see is we see some red blood cells. In a single drop, we see about 5 million red blood cells. And these carry the oxygen around in our blood. We also see some white blood cells. And these are important, these fight infection. But what we have to do is zoom in between these cells, much deeper in between these cells. And if we do, we see billions of extracellular vesicles. And these are so tiny that you can fit thousands of them across the width of a human hair. And we need to use specialized microscopes to see these EVs. And this is a video from our lab, and these are human EVs from blood. Now, as I said, these contain powerful information. And this communication system can go wrong in disease. And what we're finding is that the amount of these EVs and also the contents of these EVs, not only just in them, but also on them, can change. And we can use these changes, we can take advantage of them to actually diagnose the disease. Now, to, I suppose, help you understand this more, I want to give you two examples of using these EVs to diagnose diseases. The first example I'm going to give you is a disease that's particularly hard to diagnose. And the second example I'll give you is a disease that can only be diagnosed after we die. So the first example is a disease that's particularly hard to diagnose, and that is a type of brain tumour known as a glioma. So this brain tumour is embedded deep within our brains. And to properly diagnose this, we need to have advanced imaging, but also sometimes we need to have very invasive operations to take a small part of that tumour to not only diagnose, to understand the staging of this tumour. Now, what researchers have found looking at the blood of these glioma patients is that they have billions more EVs in their blood. And these extra EVs in their blood are actually coming from that brain tumour deep within the brains of these patients. So we can use the blood of these patients to actually diagnose the disease. And not only that, but the amount of these EVs directly correlates with the staging of the tumour. So the more EVs these people have in their blood, the worse the tumour is. My second example is an example of a disease that you can only diagnose after you die. And this disease is known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE for short. And this is a disease we are actually all familiar with because it's been in the media a lot lately. This is a chronic brain injury disease leading to degeneration, and it's caused as a result of multiple collisions or from contact sports, such as boxing, rugby, or American football. And as I said, you can only diagnose this disease after the person dies. And you may have actually seen this in a movie called Concussion, which starred Will Smith as Dr. Bennett Omalu, who's the physician that actually found this disease. And how he found this disease was that he took slices of the brains of retired NFL players, and he looked at these under a microscope and he could see physical changes. But he could only do this, obviously, post-mortem. Now, earlier this year, scientists in Harvard looked at the blood of ex-NFL players who were showing signs of CTE. And what they found when they compared it to professional athletes, but professional athletes who weren't involved in contact sports, what they found was they found buckets more of a certain type of EV in the blood of those ex-NFL athletes. And the higher the amount of these particular type of EVs, the worse these people performed on memory tests. So now I want you to contemplate a scenario. What if, in 10 years' time, we could diagnose many diseases by looking at the EVs from a single drop of blood? And as exciting as this is, I want you to now imagine another fascinating scenario. What if we knew the changes associated with disease, we could take out these EVs and change them appropriately? So we could, in effect, give these EVs superpowers create special Jedi Master EVs that we could put into the body that could go in and attack and crush the dark forces of disease. So not only can we use these EVs to diagnose disease, we may also be able to use these EVs to treat and cure disease. So to wrap up, I want to leave you with 3 points for contemplation. The first is to remember that there are billions of EVs in your blood, in your sweat, in your tears, and don't forget, also in your saliva. These EVs have huge potential to diagnose disease. But not only that, there are exciting future opportunities to use these EVs to attack and treat disease. And with the increasing amounts of scientific research in this area, these possibilities and this future is much closer than you think. Thank you.